I think one of the great attractions of this film is that Rocky is the second player. It's a buddy movie, and the idea of building and bringing to screen the second player in the movie was really exciting. He's also a really interesting design, you know, as told in the book. You already begin to think of how he might appear and how he might sort of be in the project. So all in all, he's a great, you know, he's a great star in his own little right. Yeah. So our initial conversations between myself and Chris really were, you know, we sort of looked at the things they liked the most or the things that showed promise and just got a feeling for where we might go with him. I think the other was to really understand how they wanted to bring this to the screen. They were very, very keen to use puppetry and the elements that come with that. And also the fact that I think that the personality of Rocky is very, very important to them. So that immediacy, both for them and for Ryan, was really important to them. We understood, obviously, that Rocky has 5 legs, and he has a little, you know, he has this carapace, as it's described. So that's a pretty good starting point, but to be honest, that's, you know, that was, we really did underestimate, I think, the versions and options that you can create just on that very, very simple description. So we looked at all kinds of shapes, all kinds of silhouettes, how the limbs may or may not work, how many joints there were in the limbs. And we literally started by doing many, many sketches, both in 2 dimensions and in 3 dimensions. And what I mean by 3 dimensions is either working in a computer environment like ZBrush, or actually physically sculpting maquettes, little models. And they were very freeform, and at the same time we were exploring not only the shape, the physicality of Rocky, but also what did, you know, his nickname is Rocky, or his name is Rocky, so what does that really mean? Is he made of rock? Does he just remind you of rock? Is he angular? Is he soft? Is he a combination of all of those things? So you can imagine when you really start to sort of mine into those ideas, just how many versions you could you know discuss and work on before you actually find that eureka moment where you think, okay, we've found something. There's something here that we're all responding positively to. That's the moment that you are all working towards, and the moment that we wish to get to, because at that point you start that positive route to the design that you see finally on the screen. I think the personality of Rocky starts at the very beginning with his physical shape. Then you start to look at kind of how does he stand? How does he present himself in repose? What is his relaxed state? And I think that's an element of you know, it can be something with 5 legs can very quickly become quite intimidating. It can become aggressive, or it can become slightly creepy. If you're a person that doesn't like spiders, then you have to be very careful that we don't tread into that world. So those are the early thoughts that you have when it comes to physicality. And then I think you look very closely at the proportions. Again, the size of the carapace, it was amazing how you could change Rocky's personality with subtle changes in the size of his carapace, the thickness of his arms, the size of his upper arms compared with his lower arms. If he had upper arms, mid arms and lower arms, then that too had a change to the way you respond. And then, of course, he has his hands, and his hands are also a very important part of his physical personality. His emotional personality, we always know, comes out actually later in performance when you physically start to move and bring the character to life. One of the most important, if not the most important, design decision that we make in the early days is how can a puppeteer or a group of puppeteers manipulate this character? Are we going to build this as purely as a rod puppet, or as a puppet that they have their physical hands on? And if we're going to make it more sophisticated than that, how do we not lose that ability for the puppeteers to impart their personality into what we would then call a more animatronic-based character? It became obvious that we were going to have to take some of the most sophisticated motors on the market. In fact, some of the motors that we're using in Rocky, we are the first people to use them. We were granted that with the company that produced them. So we had, in many ways, their beta versions. But Josh took that even further by dismantling what they had done and re-engineering it to suit his needs. And the net result was, I think, a phenomenon. I don't think we've ever built anything that is this sophisticated, has this ability to deliver a performance which matches the puppeteer's inputs. The great thing about the animatronic puppet is that it requires no puppeteers to be around him at all. In other words, you get a clean shot. He can stand or sit or be posed in any part of the frame. He can be next to Ryan, he can relate to Ryan, and there is nothing else that essentially, other than a wire, that needs to be, should I say, digitally removed later. When you get into using a puppet, the puppet is always going to be attached to a number of puppeteers. At worst case scenario, 5 puppeteers are involved at bringing Rocky to life. You can reduce that number down, but there will always be rods or the presence of potentially a puppeteer's body. That's not a problem to us anymore because digital effects are very, very good and very, very versed and very helpful at removing all of those elements. Phil and Chris are very organic in their directing process, and they very much enjoy a certain amount of improvisation. And improvisation is something that is very easy to do or very easy to respond to if it's on a human one-to-one basis. More difficult if you're talking to a robot and you expect that robot to suddenly improvise and do something that it wasn't necessarily expecting. So the first time Ryan got to interact with Rocky was really on what we would call one of our, they're sort of called show and tells. I mean, we show and we reveal. And we did right here in the workshop here that we have at Shepperton, we did a little demonstration for Ryan when he first arrived. And it was a way of introducing not only us, but also Rocky, and also really just, how it was all going to work for him too. So he could see the technology and the techniques that we were using. And he was brilliant, I mean, I think he found it hopefully interesting, and I think he found it engaging, and I think hopefully he found it exciting too. And that certainly is the way that he's responded to Rocky on the set. I don't ever sense that he feels that he's working alongside, not working alongside a living entity in some form. I do think we have a very special design. And the design is everything. And, there were lots of sleepless nights, there's lots of doubt that you're going to hit on a design that hopefully the world will engage with. And I genuinely believe that we found that, along with Phil and Chris, we've found a wonderful design. So we're very proud of that. And 2 is I think that we also provide for this production the most versatile and usable versions of what we would call practical effects. I think we're proud that we were able, the animatronic puppet in particular was never a known entity, and it was literally seat of your pants right the way through. So again, incredibly proud of everybody that made that happen.